Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session this afternoon. My name's Karl Scotland. Quick introduction. So I'm a Lean and Agile consultant. I spend my time going around helping organizations going through agile transformations. And this session is going to be about some ideas that I think are really important and are really useful for organizations who are going through transformations to make those transformations as successful as possible. Before we get into it, let's try a little bit of a poll. So if you get your phone out or laptop or whatever, any internet-enabled device, and go to pollev.com/Øredev, when I click to the next slide, a poll will be activated with 3 questions in it. So these 3 questions are going to be all in a similar form like this. So thinking about your experiences within your organizations or organizations that you've worked for or worked with, there are going to be 3 prompts. And those 3 prompts are going to have a scale of 1 to 6. And 1's going to be one extreme form of answer, 6 is going to be another extreme, and there's a continuum between them. So think about the prompt, look at the 2 extremes and see whereabouts you fit on that continuum. And when we've got a good set of answers for the 3 prompts, let's just review the answers. So, hopefully we should see all the in-progress surveys going on there. I'll just give a couple of minutes until it looks like everybody's finished. Nearly there. Good way of finding out how many people are in the audience, this. Okay, I'm going to, I think I have to switch out to start showing the results. So I'll show the results. Those of you that are still finishing, I think you should be able to still finishing these. So the first question was, in your experience, people are given either detailed instructions through to simple intent. So by detailed instructions, I mean, you're told exactly what to do. You're not given any reasons for why to do that or how to go about it. Just follow the orders. Or the simple intent end of this scale is, here's what I want to achieve. I don't care. I don't care how you go about doing it as long as we meet this intent. And yeah, that's kind of pretty mostly round about the middle, some instruction, some intent. Next one then. So in your experience, people focus more on being indispensable at one end of the scale. So I have to know everything. Everything has to go through me. People have to ask me about everything, and the other end becoming redundant. I'm not needed anymore. And this is fairly typical as well, more down towards that being indispensable, because people want a role in the organization. You want to feel like you have a job. The idea of making yourself redundant seems a little bit alien, and it's an extreme, so you don't want to. but maybe the idea that we shouldn't be such bottlenecks in the organization, and maybe we should pass on some of our knowledge to other people so that maybe we can make ourselves redundant, or if we win the lottery and we disappear, the organization isn't left with a big problem without us. And then the last one, in your experience, people are rewarded for either avoiding errors or taking risks. So avoiding errors, just don't make mistakes, don't fail, get everything right first time. And at the other end, taking risks where, hey, if you take a risk and it doesn't plan out, doesn't work out, that's okay. It's better to take risks than avoid errors. And yeah, most organizations are very kind of failure intolerant. If you're caught doing something which is seen to be a mistake, that's usually seen as a bad thing. So I want to pick up on those three ideas really, and that's what I mean by leading lasting learning. So the leadership bit is about clarifying intent. To me, good leadership really explains why we want people to do the job, what we want people to achieve. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk about a framework and a model called the X matrix as a way of doing that. The lasting bit is developing understanding of people. So by lasting, I mean lasting organizations looking for the long term and not the short term. So we develop people, and we develop people's knowledge and capability and skills so that the organization can survive and can thrive in the future without us being here now. And we'll talk about an approach called catchball as a way of doing that. And then the last bit is learning. And learning is really about failure and befriending failure, not necessarily seeing failure as a bad thing. Equally not celebrating failure. We don't want to fail for the sake of it. But seeing failure as something which is okay, and therefore thinking in terms of experiments. Not going to spend a huge amount of time on the last one, mostly because I've cheated a little bit. I'm doing 2 talks. My talk tomorrow is mostly focusing on learning and failure, so if you want to know more about that, come to my talk tomorrow. But I will mention it today. This isn't going to be like, I was kind of thinking when I went to see Lord of the Rings with my wife, and we kind of sat through 3 hours of film, and my wife went, is it finished? Is that it? Do I have to come back some more? So we'll kind of wrap things up and talk a little bit about learning in this. So leading first, and the idea of clarifying intent and what the X matrix is. So we'll go back to, I'm going to reference a number of books. So this is a book by Stephen Bungay called The Art of Action. And this is actually referencing Field Marshal Helmuth von Moltke, who was the chief of staff in the Prussian army at the end of the 19th century. So over 100 years ago, it turns out that the military had solved a lot of the problems that we're struggling now with in our organizations. And the prevailing view at the time, and I'd argue the prevailing view in most organizations now still, is that alignment and autonomy were an either-or. There were two extremes of a spectrum. You could have one or the other, but not both. So you'd get alignment and get a strong alignment within your unit by telling people what to do, and therefore those people had no autonomy. Or you could give people high autonomy and they could do what they like, but if people were doing what they like, you'd have no alignment because you'd have chaos. Now, von Moltke's insight was that these were not independent things. Well, so they are independent things. They're not, they're not an either-or. So what he said was, you have high alignment by focusing on intent up at the top here. If you give clear intent, then people can align behind that intent, and you can then give people the autonomy down here in order to take their own action. So they can figure out what they want to do themselves aligned to your intent. So be clear on intent is the fundamental thing that you need if you want people to take the initiative and do their own things. And this is a great way of creating engagement. So if people understand why they're being asked to do things and have the autonomy to do that, they're more likely to be engaged. So there's the idea of an engagement model, which is becoming more popular in the Agile community. This is the definition by Dan Mezek, who has an approach called open space agility. So he describes an engagement model as a pattern or a set of patterns reducible to practice, which result in employee engagement during the implementation of an organizational change initiative. So when I'm working with organizations, going through change, what I don't want to do is just say, right, use this framework, use this methodology, do SAFe, do Spotify, because people won't be engaged, because I'm not empowering people to figure out how to solve the problem. What we want to be doing instead is saying, here's the intent, here's the problems we're trying to solve with an organizational transformation. Let's figure this out together. Let's see what works and what doesn't work, and therefore people are going to be more engaged in that transformation. So the engagement model I use, I call TASTE. So this is, I didn't realize it was an engagement model when I first started it, but as the idea of the engagement model became popular, I kind of realized that this is really what I'm doing. So I like to start with understanding of what a true north is. Then I talk to organizations about what their aspirations are. Then we talk about what their strategies are to meet those aspirations. Then we talk about the tactics, the things they're actually going to do. And then we're going to talk about what evidence they look for to see if those things are working. So, true north, that's an orientation. So it's true north because it's like a guiding compass. When we're deciding and making decisions about what we should do, what we should try, we can ask ourselves, does this take us towards our true north? So it's an orientation that informs what we should do, but it doesn't tell us what to do. Then we have our aspirations. So these are the results that we hope to achieve. So organizations are measured on results. We don't necessarily want those results to be targets. If you were in Doc's talk earlier, he kind of talked about Goodhart's law and the idea that the paraphrasing I like to use is as soon as a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a useful measure. But that's not to say measures themselves are bad. That's not to say our organizations shouldn't have aspirations and we want to measure ourselves against those aspirations. It gives us an understanding of the size of ambition, or maybe even the size of the problem that we need to solve. So let's have clarity on what the results we hope to achieve are, and then how are we going to go and achieve those results? What things do we need to do differently? What are the current problems or current obstacles that's going to stop us achieving those ambitions? That leads us into strategy. Strategy are the guiding policies that enable our choice. They're almost like a decision on how we make decisions. So again, they're not telling us what to do, but they're saying, let's focus on these areas or these problems. And then once we've got an understanding of what our strategies are, then we can implement those strategies with tactics. So the coherent action that we're going to take. These are the investments that we're making, the initiatives that we're implementing, maybe even the projects that we're working on. Those are very tactical things. If those tactics are the right tactics, then hopefully they're going to generate evidence. So this is where we're looking at the outcomes which are going to indicate progress or indicate the signs that we're winning, to use kind of language of Roger Martin. So these are leading metrics, which hopefully, if we see these leading metrics moving in the right direction, that's going to give us confidence that we're going to be able to achieve our aspirations. So I like to talk to organizations about these 5 elements. What's our true north? What aspirations do we want to achieve? What strategies are we using to meet those aspirations? And then how do our tactics align to those strategies, and what evidence will we look for? And actually, you want coherence between all of these things. This isn't a kind of a nice work breakdown structure where one aspiration is met by a strategy, and that strategy has its own tactics, and those tactics have its measures or its pieces of evidence. There's many-to-many relationships within them. We want coherence across them all. They should all correlate with each other, so we should be able to understand how they all fit together, and we should see how everything contributes to each other. This is where the X matrix comes in, because we can visualize this. So this is a very simple example, but at the bottom we have an aspiration here. So I've missed out the true north on this just for simplicity, but let's say an aspiration for our organization is to increase sales by X%. That's where we want to be. At the end of the year results, we want to show that we've increased our sales by X%. Our strategy to do that is more frequent releases. And you see this little dot here. What this is telling me is that I think there's a strong coherence, a strong correlation between releasing more frequently and increasing sales. I can then say, okay, if our strategy is to release more frequently, what are we going to do? Well, let's invest in continuous delivery at the top. Let's put a DevOps type pipeline in. That's a fairly nice tactical thing we can do. And again, this dot says those things are related. I can clearly tell a story about how implementing in continuous delivery will help us release more frequently, which should drive more sales. If we're if we have a good continuous delivery pipeline, what evidence should we see? We'll probably see a lower lead time. So the time from starting a piece of work through to getting into production should get lower. And again, the solid dot there shows that there's a strong correlation. And then completing the circle, if we have a lower lead time, that will release to more sales. Now this is a non-solid dot, it's kind of an empty circle, because that's suggesting, well, there's some correlation there. Maybe it's not as strong as the others. So it's a weak correlation or an indirect correlation. So let's give us one simple loop around the X matrix. We can then fill that in more and say, well, actually, we've got multiple aspirations, multiple strategies, multiple tactics, and multiple pieces of evidence, and they're all going to fit within each other. And I typically do this on an A3 piece of paper. So you've now got a single A3 piece of paper which visualizes all these different pieces of the puzzle and how they fit together, or maybe sometimes how they don't fit together. So if you look at that, does anybody notice anything interesting, or does anyone raise any questions, or anything unusual you see on that X matrix? So the deliberate one I put in there, I mean, there's multiple things. But it raises questions. Is at the top here. Oh, I think my battery is going on this. So tactic 2, you'll notice, doesn't have any correlation at all with 2 of our strategies. It only has a weak correlation with the 3rd one. And similarly over here, is this going to work? Nope. I'll give up on that. You'll see that tactic 2 against the evidence, it's only got a correlation against one of the pieces of evidence. So that might raise some questions about why are we doing tactic 2, because it doesn't seem to fit with our strategies or our evidence. Now, it might not be that it's the wrong thing. It might be that we need to go back and revisit our strategies, or maybe we need to go back and find another piece of evidence or rework our evidence. But what I found is when you start filling these things in and having conversations with people about them, it's a really good conversation starter, and it gets that clarity of intent, clarity of understanding about what we're doing and why we're doing it, how we know whether it's going to be working. I do have a template, and I'll put a link at the end for this to download, which is a kind of a slightly larger one that has some space in the middle for you to put the true north as well. As I said, the key thing about it is the conversation. Do you have any photographers in the room? No. Okay. Well, I was going to ask a photographer to rate this photograph out of 10. Typically, it gets a low mark because it's out of focus, it's blurred. But this is a photograph of my daughter, and it's actually one of my favourite photographs. Anybody read Jeff Patton's user story mapping book? So he uses a holiday photograph analogy and says you can show somebody a photograph of the holiday and they'll look at it and kind of go, interesting photograph, doesn't mean anything to me. Whereas if you were there on that holiday, that photograph brings back lots and lots of memories for you, so much more meaningful. So similar with the X matrix. So this is a holiday photograph of my daughter. We were in Ibiza. It was a foam party in Ibiza, but don't worry, it was just kind of around the hotel one. It wasn't a hardcore one. But we had a great time. Means a lot to me, that photograph, but probably doesn't mean anything to anybody else in the room. So there's a quote from a book by Thomas Jackson, Hoshin Kanri for the Lean Enterprise, which is a book about the X matrix. I recommend it with a large caveat that it's very dull, but there's nuggets of gold in there. And this is one of them. It's the memory of what was said and felt that creates the alignment, not the final piece of paper. So this isn't somebody filling in an X matrix and then just emailing around and saying, we have an X matrix, make it so. You use these things collaboratively, have conversations about them with other people, refine your understanding until you get to the point where you think it's good enough. But even then, you're probably still going to come back to it. So that's the kind of leadership, intent, and the X matrix. The lasting bit then is developing our understanding. Once we have that intent, and we want people to go out there and start meeting that intent, we want to make sure they have the right understanding, the right capabilities in order to do that. And we can do that with a process called catchball. So catchball is another kind of lean bit of terminology, and it's as simple as it sounds. It's just like throwing a ball around the organization and people catch it. But instead of throwing a ball around, what we're doing is throwing ideas around. ideas, suggestions, proposals. You throw it to somebody, they catch it, they reflect on it. Hopefully they'll improve it, they'll put their input into it, and then they'll either pass it back or they pass it on. So it's a way of passing ideas around the organisation so everybody gets the chance to input into it. Kind of more technical definition, consensus process to translate organisational strategy into the daily tactical work. So just giving people intent and strategy isn't enough. People need to take that and figure out how to translate it in a way that maintains the alignment. So catchball is a way of doing that. This is how I like to try and visualize it. So imagine you've kind of got a central leadership group. This is probably the group that's maybe initiated an X-matrix type process. So they've decided what the intent is, and they've started talking about how we might go start making that intent. The idea of the colours here is to represent different pieces of the organisation, different disciplines, different business units. People will kind of take an idea, probably a kind of big tactical initiative, and they'll go off and work with another team. Now they're not handing that off to another team, they're working with another team. So these people are part of both teams here. This person is part of the central team, but he's also part of this team. And they kind of work, and that's kind of throwing the ball, and they'll come up with some ideas and some suggestions and improvements. Maybe they'll go off and work with further teams. So this is the way we start bringing more and more people into the organisation, into the improvement process, getting their feedback, getting their input, and then the ideas get passed both kind of from that inside group back to the outside, but also around the organisation as well. So hopefully we're getting as many people involved, getting the input from as many people as possible, rather than just dictating a plan, go off and do this. This is related to an idea called the leader-leader model. So David Marquet wrote the book called Turn the Ship Around. Has anybody read this? So a few people. David Marquet was a commander of a nuclear submarine. And he took over a new submarine at short notice, and it was a type of submarine that he'd never commanded before. So submarines are different, apparently. He was working on a submarine, he didn't really know the details and the ins and outs, and he had to command this thing. And he suddenly realised that if he tried to give commands to his crew, he was going to give the wrong commands. And he tells the example of giving an order, and that order went all the way down, and the order was something like, shift it into second gear. It wasn't that, because I know nuclear submarines don't have gears, but turned out this nuclear submarine didn't have 2 gears, it only had 1 gear. But this command went all the way down to the bottom, to the guy who had to kind of press the button, who kind of didn't do anything. Eventually, David Marquet realised that nothing had happened and kind of went, why haven't you done this? And eventually he got the message, because this submarine can't do that. Like, well, why did nobody tell me? Well, because they were just being used to following orders. And the message came back, well, we thought you knew something about this submarine that we didn't know. So he realised that if he wanted to command, if he was going to when he says turn the ship around, he turned it from the worst performing submarine to the best performing submarine in the fleet. He needed to give control to people. So that's kind of the top bit of this model. He didn't give orders, he gave intent. So he needed to give clarity of intent about what he wanted to do. So it wasn't about putting it into second gear or what the equivalent was. It was about, we need to move into deeper water. Now the crew can figure out what are the things we need to move into deeper water. So do we need to dive? Do we need to engage the motors? All these other things. But also the people needed the competence to be able to do that. Because if they didn't have the skills to do it, then there were people on the crew, and probably himself, who maybe did have the skills and could develop people. There's a really good, that YouTube link is a nice little 10-minute video. I was originally planning on showing it, and then I realised it was probably 25% of my time, and not the best use of the time. But I'd recommend going and looking at that. But it's a great story, and read the book as well, about we want to give control to people in order to give them autonomy. In order to do that, we need to give them clarity of intent, but we also need to develop people, develop their understanding, and make sure that they've got the competence. So we can kind of mash up the Marquet model and the Bungay model, which is what I've tried to do here. So if you squint your eyes and just tilt your head a little bit, that should look like you've got the two bottom lines are coming out of the screen at you. It's 3 dimensions. So you've got autonomy and alignment, and we can say autonomy is about giving control, and alignment is about giving people clarity. And then Marquet has this third bit about competence, so we can say that's about growing people's ability. And we need all of those things, and we take people on a journey. So we don't just give control to people, because they might not have the competence, they might not quite understand the intent yet. So it's about kind of slowly moving up on this kind of dotted line that's coming out of the screen at you. So as you kind of increase people's ability, increase the alignment, you can slowly give more and more control, and that's really what you're trying to do within the transformation. Back to Bungay. His model is called directed opportunism. So he says, we want to achieve some outcomes within our organization. To achieve those outcomes, we're going to need to make some plans. And once we have some plans, we can put those plans into action. And then that action that we take should lead to the outcomes. Now the problem is, we have these gaps, the knowledge gap, the alignment gap, and the effects gap. So the knowledge gap is, in order to make plans, we don't know everything we need to do. So there's a difference between what we'd like to know and what you actually know. And then once we have a plan, there's an alignment gap, because there's a difference between the plan says people should do and what people will actually do. Turns out people aren't very good at following plans sometimes. And then even once we take action and we follow the plan, usually the effect isn't what we quite anticipated. So that's the effects gap, the difference between what we expect to achieve, or expect the actions to achieve, and what actually happens. So the typical way of solving this problem and managing these gaps is detail. So what we try and do is get more detailed information up front so we can come up with more detailed plans. And those detailed plans have more detailed instructions so that we can tell people exactly what to do. So there's no mistake, there's no doubt about what we want them to do. And then we put detailed controls in place to make sure that when the action gets taken, it achieves the outcome that we originally intended. So basically, lots and lots of micromanagement. People familiar with that approach? Kind of fairly common. What Bungay says is you should do the opposite. You actually limit direction. So to manage the knowledge gap, you limit direction to defining and communicating intent. So the idea of intent again, just give people the intent, allow people to come up with their own plans. And then the alignment gap, once they've defined their own plans, that's them defining how they're going to achieve the intent, and this piece about back briefing that I'll come to. And then once they take action, we give them the freedom to adjust the action, because they know what the intent is. So as they start realizing that what they're doing isn't quite working, we make sure people have the freedom to fail, freedom to learn that what they're doing isn't working, and make some changes and make adjustments. So it's all about having less detail and giving people more freedom than micromanaging people. But the key thing here, and the main reason I bring it up now, is this idea of back briefing. So when we ask people to come up and make plans, we want them to brief back. Effectively, from the military perspective, we give a mission, and we give a team or a unit a brief, and we ask them to give that brief back to us. So they tell us back, here's our understanding of what you've asked us to do, here's what we're planning on doing in order to do that, does that make sense? And if what they come back with doesn't make sense, then we've got an alignment problem, and we can fix it early. So if we've asked a group, so for a military example, we've asked a group to cross a canyon, and they come back and say, yeah, okay, we're going to cross this canyon by bringing this big metal bridge, high weight structure, so we can get all the tanks across it. And then we say, actually, no, we just want to get across the canyon so we can get some food to the locals. We're not going to invade them. So crossing the canyon, we've misunderstood the intent, and we've come up with a plan that's not right. We can now pick up on that before we've corrected it. So back briefing we can do, again, another A3. And so my friend Mike Burrows says every consultant has their own A3. I like to kind of trump him and say I have 3 A3s, because that's how good a consultant I am. That is a joke. So this is what I call a back briefing A3, and it's taking some of those ideas from Bungay and saying, if we're going to give people a mission, and we're going to give people a brief of what we'd like them to do to meet our intent, let's make sure that we can fill in an A3 to describe the context, the intent, the higher intent. How does what we're going to do help the organisation? Make sure people have the right people on the team. Make sure people understand their boundaries, their freedoms and constraints. So we're going to give people freedom, but we probably don't want them to be kind of spending a huge amount of money, or there might be some technologies that we have to stick with. So there's some things that maybe we can't do. Let's make sure we understand what those boundaries are, and then start coming up with an initial plan. And this is effectively a way of doing back briefing on an A3 piece of paper. The last bit then briefly is learning and the idea of befriending failure with experiments. So I'm going to dig into this a lot more detail in my talk tomorrow. But for now, this is really about the nuts of strategy deployment. So you probably noticed I've mentioned strategy quite a lot in this, and this is really what I'm trying to do within transformations, is turn them into strategy deployment exercises. The Japanese, so strategy deployment comes from the Japanese word hoshinkanri. It's another lean idea. The more literal translation is direction management. So setting the direction of the organization, the true north, managing in that direction, but not telling people what to do to get there. There's a nice little metaphor, kind of metaphorical translation: ship in a storm going in the right direction. Your organisation is the ship, the storm is the economy, the technical landscapes, the disruption, everything that's going on, and we want to get the ship to out of the storm into safe harbour. So how do we do that? Well, we can go around kind of giving each sailor on the ship detailed instructions, or we can just kind of go, we need to go there, row. Everybody kind of starts rowing in the same direction. I like to define it as any form of organisational improvement in which solutions emerge from the people closest to the problem. So as an organisation, we need to improve in some way. We need to go through some sort of transformation. There is some sort of problem. There are problems that we're having in order to do that. Rather than expecting the highest paid people to know all the answers and have all the answers, we want the highest paid people to be clear on what the problems are, and allow the solutions to come from the people that are really at the coalface almost, because they're probably the people with the most information and the best information as to how to solve these problems. And this is the third A3, so an experiment A3. So when we're getting down to that detailed action about what we're going to do, the things we're going to try, if we treat what we're doing as experiments, then because they're experiments, sometimes they're going to succeed, sometimes they're going to fail. So we're taking action not to guarantee success, we're taking action in order to learn, and we learn from our successes and our failures. So being clear about our hypothesis, the rationale behind those hypotheses, the action we're going to take, and then what success or failure might look like. And because we want experiments to be small experiments that don't kind of blow up the organisation or kill people, if these experiments prove to be successful and prove to be useful, how do we amplify them, roll them out further? Equally, what are we going to do if they fail? So just being intentional about the fact that failure might happen, and that's okay. Which means we get into the idea of strategy deployment as a scientific approach, and it's really nested experimentation. So your hypothesis, your strategy is a hypothesis. We think this is the right strategy. You might even say that your aspirations are a hypothesis because you think that's what you're going to do. So you're going to go through a big plan, do, study, act cycle, kind of the scientific method. But if you're doing that in an annual cycle, that's a long feedback loop. So as we move into the do stage of that, we start running some smaller experiments. So this is where we start getting down to some of the tactical things that we're going to do. But even those might be things that we're not going to start seeing results for months maybe. So actually each of those we break down into even smaller experiments. So at each level we're running experiments. Probably at the top, our X matrix is our highest level of hypothesis. Then we get down to back briefing as the next level down, and that breaks down into the experiment A3s. And the experiment A3s, as we start getting results back from those fine-grade experiments, that feeds back to our back briefing and steers that, and that feeds back into our X matrix as about, are we generating the evidence we were hoping to generate? Is our strategy the right strategy? Do we need to make any adjustments at the strategy level? Similarly, if we look at this diagram, X matrix probably comes from the central, and then as we move out towards the edges of the organization and the people that are really doing the work, we move through back briefing and experiments. So the idea of strategy as a scientific approach comes from, well, it doesn't come from it, but Richard Rummel talks about this a lot in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I believe that a successful agile transformation, or any form of organizational transformation, should be a strategic approach, and a good transformation will align with a lot of the things that Rummel talks about in terms of good strategy. And he talks about a strategy kernel, the 3 core things that you should have. The picture is a popcorn kernel. I've had quite a bit of feedback that it's not obvious, so I have to explain that now. The 3 things are: 1, diagnosis. So do we understand the diagnosis of the problem we're trying to solve? If we haven't got a diagnosis, we're just doing stuff. So what problem we're trying to solve, what's our diagnosis? That's to me is a little bit about clarity of intent. Let's clear the intent is to solve whatever problems we've discovered in our diagnosis. Then the guiding policies are these boundaries that we want to contain. And if we have no boundaries, we have chaos. So some boundaries which are enabling constraints within which people can work as we develop them and as they grow the capability in order to start solving these problems. And then the coherent action then are the detailed experiments that we start taking. And all those 3 things you want to line up. So leading, lasting learning then. 3 questions then to ask about if you're going through a transformation. Do you know what your organization's intent is? Why are you going through a transformation? What problem are you trying to solve? Are people able to carry it out on their own? Or do they need instruction to be able to do that? So do we need to develop people in order to figure some of these things out? And then as people are figuring out and trying things out, do they have the freedom to fail? And I think those are the 3 key questions. Let's pick on that first one. So you should be able to go to that URL again, polev.com/Øredev, and there's one more question there now. So in one word, this is going to generate a word cloud. So if you start adding spaces, it'll put it up as multiple words. If you're going through an agile transformation, or any form of organizational transformation, what would you say the intent of that transformation is? I'm kind of interested in what people put on this. So do people understand what the intents are of any transformations you're going through? Destruction. It's an interesting one. So I'm guessing market fits with the, is there somebody put time to market or something like that? Oh yeah, I can see time to market. So what's interesting with this is that, again, there's no right or wrong answers, really. When I ask people for this, generally, the closer you get to a business outcome, an organizational outcome, the better the intent. So for any of these, you could always do a kind of a 5 whys on it. So quality, I think, was one of the first ones up there. We could say, well, why do we... So quality may be part of our diagnosis, and that may be part of the strategy. What is quality? What is a lack of quality solving that we need to achieve? But equally, sometimes it's, yeah, the quality is, that's just what we're trying to do. Okay. These are the books I've mentioned. There's one other book that I've took off here because I'll talk about it more tomorrow. But Hoshin Kanri for the Lean Enterprise is kind of dives into the X matrix. Getting the right things done is a much simpler read that talks about A3s a lot in terms of strategy deployment. The Art of Action, the Stephen Bungay book, David Marquez, Turn the Ship Around, and then Rummel's Good Strategy and Bad Strategy. I'll make these slides available with the poll results in them and tweet them or email me if you want me to email copies to you. Templates are on that URL there, the 3 A3 templates I mentioned, and the second URL is just a whole load of blog posts where I've kind of written up about a lot of this stuff. Otherwise, thank you very much. I think I'm out of time.